What we know is a drop. What we don't know is the ocean.
Hello and welcome to the Newton Knowledge Podcast. My name is Mark Singer, partner of Newton One Advisors. The Newton Knowledge Podcast will provide meaningful content to our valued advisor community. Our discussions will deliver unique insights into the people, processes, and products that make our industry so critical. Newton One is a national life insurance planning firm delivering customized insurance solutions structured to help clients and their advisors engaged in solving estate planning, wealth transfer, business succession, and executive benefits challenges. We are a member of the M Financial Group, which provides our clients access to the nation's elite carriers and exclusive products available only through our network. Today, we're at the Delaware Art Museum. And why, you ask? Because the Philadelphia Museum of Art said no, they wouldn't host us. I'm only partly kidding, but I wanted to give a special shout out to Molly Giordano and her team for allowing us to record here at such a remarkably interesting museum, and I genuinely mean that. If you're in the area and you haven't checked this place out, you should. Molly and her team do a fantastic job from their exhibitions, tours. They have art classes and even host events here for people charitably inclined. So please check it out. Very community-based museum. So thank you very much, Molly. We're here to discuss valuations of fine art and how proactive planning or lack thereof can dramatically affect the transfer of assets from one generation to the next. Joining us today is Colleen Boyle, Managing Director, Head of Business Development and Philanthropic Strategy of the Fine Art Group. She has valued art and collectibles for international corporations, museums, and private collectors across the globe. Colleen has provided legal analysis for court cases involving art valuation and identification. Colleen earned her diploma in French Fine and Decorative Arts at Christie's in Paris, as well as a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from the College of William and Mary. She conducts lectures and continuing education classes on diverse topics pertinent to art and collectibles, and is featured in the documentary titled The Real Fake. Calling in from New York, we have a dear friend of Colleen and a wonderful art law attorney, Samantha Anderson, with Patterson, Belknap, Webb, and Tyler art and museum law practice. Prior to joining the firm, Ms. Anderson served as in-house counsel to an international art advisory and Sotheby's auction house, where she was vice president in their fiduciary client group. Ms. Anderson advises clients on a broad range of issues in the art industry, including transactional matters such as private sales and consignments, as well as commissions of art, artist representation, and various estate planning and philanthropic matters surrounding complex collections, including valuation issues. Ms. Anderson is a frequent speaker on art law topics and holds various leadership and board positions. So, Samantha, we'll kick it off with you. If a family owns fine art or significant collectibles, can you take us through the estate planning process from your perspective?
Yeah. I'll start with kind of what does significant mean? I mean, significant could mean value, it can mean volume. Sometimes there are families that have very large collections of items that don't necessarily hold a lot of value. And sometimes there are smaller collections, but they hold a lot of value. So depending on what the makeup is of the collection, and certainly what kind of categories it includes. Does it include fine art, meaning painting, sculpture, works on paper, or is it more in the decorative art? Sometimes that means furniture, ethnographic material, or in the collectibles realm, which could be jewelry, watches, wine, sneakers. So there's a lot that goes into just first identifying what kind of collection is this, and what kind of process you're going to apply is really going to depend on what there is. But step one of all of this is what do they have? So exactly this question of, do they know what they have? If they're coming to an estate planning lawyer or advisor, do they understand the items? Meaning, do they know that it's fine art? Do they know what it's worth? Do they know if they have any of the paperwork and invoices? And also understanding kind of the sentimental versus the monetary. They might have a very large collection of paintings that perhaps hold no real market value anymore, but maybe they were passed down from generation to generation. And so they hold some sort of sentimental value, where having specific bequests and really thinking about who's going to get what is perhaps more important than maybe a very valuable collection, where you're really thinking about maximizing that value and selling the collection either during lifetime or at death. And in that same vein, since we're talking about, again, a family here, have they thought about the disposition, and have they thought about whether the kids or family members want any of those items? So it's broadly step one, do they know what they have? Do they understand the different intricacies of what they have? And then have they thought about what they want to do with it? Have they thought about who's going to get what, donations to institutions, sale? Have they thought about the carrying costs of having these items or passing on these items? So in broad strokes, it's what do you have?
Can you get into the specifics on what makes it different when someone has fine art or collectibles in their estate in comparison to more traditional assets, if you will, such as equity in a business or real estate?
Yeah. Fine art tends to have both a more emotional component to it, whereas those other assets like real estate or business, they don't usually elicit the same reactions from family members or even from those that are planning. Now, sometimes it's closely held businesses or generational businesses, and that might teeter into the area, but really fine art intangibles tends to have this much more emotional response to it. They're also items that are very unique. They're not widgets. They're not interchangeable. They're unique objects that are typically irreplaceable. So when you're thinking about the planning, you have to be somewhat delicate about making sure that you've taken into account what all those emotional components are as well. And also for art specifically, you're thinking about the type of art that you're handling. So art is kind of the broad category, but if you're thinking about old master paintings versus Peruvian antiquities, you're going to have a very different assessment about what you need in order to plan for those items. So for example, you're thinking about title, you're thinking about authenticity, you're thinking about restricted materials sometimes, such as ivory or rosewoods. There's a lot that's going to go into the planning depending on that type of item.
Through your years of practice, what missteps have you witnessed that emphasize the severity of not truly knowing what kind of art one has in their estate?
Yeah, I think Colleen and I have often lamented the family or the planner that doesn't ask about these items. So after death, then everyone finds out that there were actually some valuable items or items that were never really looked at. There was no valuation done. There was no kind of due diligence. And so you have a mess to clean up as opposed to an opportunity to do some thoughtful planning and strategy. I think the other big misstep I always see is misconceptions about what they actually own. Colleen and I both have a lot of examples of people relying on family lore, like grandpa had a Picasso, don't worry, it's in the garage. Or, this paperweight is worth nothing, that item is garbage, and it ends up being, something valuable. So I think there's a lot of just not doing the due diligence or asking the right questions to make sure that they even understand what they have and what they need to do with it.
So you've brought up emotion now a couple times, and it makes perfect sense. And even sometimes in dealing with business owners, there tends to be emotion if they started the business themselves. And Colleen, I'll kick this over to you. I'm sure you've worked with families where heirs have been emotionally attached to grandfather's Picasso painting in his garage, and others could say, take it or leave it, I really don't care. So how do you go through those discussions and engagements, understanding that there may be an imbalance of assets transferred if one is going to take the Picasso painting and the other one isn't?
Yes, so Mark, you bring up a really good point, and Samantha's touched on, how are these assets, we like to call them passion assets, different than, say, real estate or business interests. And the one thing to keep in mind is oftentimes these assets are experiential. People like to go to an art fair and look at the art and meet the artists. People like to go to wine tastings and taste different types of wines before acquiring. People who are car enthusiasts love driving around the racetrack in their Porsche or Ferrari. So the one thing about these types of assets that is very different than other types of assets that clients might have in their financial portfolio is they do tend to be affiliated with an experience or a memory or a story. And that's what emotes this emotional connection to the assets. But to Samantha's point, what we always try to emphasize is to really understand which of the assets in a collection have more of a sentimental value versus which assets actually have a financial value. And that is very different. And as far as equitable distribution or imbalance of inherited assets, if families have these conversations, particularly having conversations during the lifetime of the collector, who tends to know a lot about the collection, so many of these issues can be resolved. So for example, I had the opportunity to work with a family, and the collector actually collected photography, had a phenomenal multi-million-dollar collection. And the collector thought that he was doing the right thing by just giving some of the photography to his grandkids. So he randomly just picked subject matters that he thought his grandkids would enjoy. Each grandchild, I think there were 7, got 2 pieces of photography each. Didn't think about the value, was really more thinking about subject matter. Well, upon his passing, one of the grandchildren called and asked if we could help the grandchild to sell the photography because they weren't really interested in photography and needed a little bit of liquidity for some student debt. We executed the sale for this grandchild, and the grandchild was able to net close to $80,000 off the sale of the 2 pieces of photography.
Wow.
Well, her brother is like, wow, wait a minute. You know, I'm really thrilled that Grandpa left us these pieces, but I could use $80,000. So we got a call from the brother, who again wanted to monetize the 2 pieces that he had owned. And unfortunately, he got the pieces that had some condition issues. And those 2 pieces sold for a total of closer to $6,000. So again, these are the types of things that can be avoided from the standpoint of an equitable distribution. Just if people understand the value, have conversations, and also understand interest. To Samantha's point, are the family members interested? What if there are no heirs? What's the solution for these assets in that situation? So it really starts with understanding value and having conversations.
Such an interesting story. Pivoting to philanthropic planning related to fine art and what monetization strategies and tangible assets for charitable endeavors. And you also assist with identifying institutions for direct donations, if you will. When do you generally get involved with that, or when would you prefer to get involved with those types of discussions?
So again, the sooner the better, having conversations around really the disposition of these assets. And to Samantha's point as well, people own a lot of different types of assets. They might own some artwork, they might own some jewelry or some watches or cars or silver or antiquities. And in some cases, some assets are a little bit easier to plan for than others. There are some complexities with these types of assets, but we are, Mark, seeing a trend with family members really wanting to utilize these passion assets towards charitable impact. And there's a lot of different ways they can do that. We have seen a trend in the single owner sale. So for example, we had a client who was an avid book collector, and during the lifetime had amassed thousands of books that were very interested and valuable to the collector. Upon passing, the collection was, again, a multi-million-dollar collection. The surviving spouse and the 2 heirs did not share that passion. And in fact, they were trying to figure out what to do with all of these books that had value. And then as we started talking about, well, what are the options? And, from the standpoint of direct donation to a monetization strategy, we came up with this idea of creating a legacy. The patriarch was very passionate about book collecting. The patriarch was also an attorney. The family, including the patriarch, was very philanthropic in their local community. So how could we take all of these different situations and bring them together to truly honor the patriarch? And we were able to put together a single owner sale with the family at a highly specialized book auction, where the collector and patriarch was highlighted in the catalog. The catalog listed the books that were being monetized. And then there was a lovely write-up about the patriarch, him as a collector, him as a philanthropist, him as a community, involvement with all types of activities. And the proceeds actually were allocated to a multi-generational donor advised fund, where the family then had a lot of flexibility to continue to support the charities that the patriarch and the family were really passionate around. So while the family themselves didn't share the same collecting passion, they did share other types of passions, and philanthropy tends to be a space that does bring families together around common issues that they want to support.
When you're donating to a museum, why is it important to communicate with the museum of choice?
So it's very important to have conversations with the museum, because the museums will usually have a collection committee, an acquisition committee, and also you want to make sure that whatever it is that you would like to donate really meets the mission and fulfills a need for the institution. There are costs involved to maintain art and art collections. And it could be that the institution maybe already has multiple examples of the artists that the donor may want to contribute. Or maybe they don't. Maybe that's a gap in the collection and therefore would be an absolutely fabulous addition to an existing collection. But it is very important to have those conversations to understand the interest of the museum and not just to bequeath the artwork without having those conversations, because similarly to heirs, it does then create a burden to the institution or even to the heirs to try to figure out what to do with these pieces. So as Samantha mentioned, it's just communication is very key, and having those conversations sooner versus later is always really helpful for all parties involved.
Makes sense. I was talking to Molly earlier before we started setting up, and I said, well, yeah. She said, well, if we just took every single donation, we'd have no room in the museum. And when you actually think it through, you're like, well, I guess you just can't take everything.
Which is always a shock whenever a museum turns down something. Clients never understand exactly what Colleen just outlined, which is that it has to fit the institution, has to be something that fills a gap. And I think there's a misconception among collectors that, of course, they bought what they loved and what they think is incredible. And so it's sometimes a hard conversation to let them know that their piece is incredible to somebody else, but maybe not the museum that they originally slated.
You get back to the emotional part of it, right?
Exactly.
So, Colleen, The Real Fake was a crime documentary about Elmer Dehori, a Hungarian painter made famous by his ability to forge very notable work and sell them to reputable galleries. Are there stories you can share with us on being part of that documentary, and has his work ever come up with any of your valuations or tenure during this field?
So, Mark, I do want to address the issue of fakes and forgeries, so Samantha can expand on this as well. The one thing to keep in mind with these types of assets, whether it's art or wine or other types of collectibles, is we are in a very unregulated industry. When you have an unregulated industry, there is an opportunity for fakes or misattribution to take place. And that's oftentimes what we see. From the standpoint of this documentary, he was truly a forger and creating artwork illegally, meaning not putting his name on it, but putting the name of a significant artist on the names of the painting. And this went on for a very, very long time. So I'm always amazed with forgery how long the forger actually continues this type of practice. And very talented from the standpoint of an artist himself, but couldn't make money, obviously, selling his own artwork, and realized he could make a significant amount of money as a forger. And that's part of the due diligence practice that Samantha addressed earlier in our conversation is, being in an unregulated industry and not always going through appropriate due diligence practices on acquisition can result in buying pieces that may not be authentic or may not be what the collector thinks they are. And we do come across this, unfortunately, and we're talking about a significant amount of money that can be transacted in this particular space. So it's very, very important, if you're buying, to understand who you're buying from, to seek appropriate advice, really get a second opinion, both on the object, the artist, the price, and the source. And the other thing we come across too is, education changes from the standpoint of attribution for certain artists. 25 years ago, there was different levels of scientific capabilities to detect whether or not an object was created in the hand of a specific artist. So even though somebody could have bought something out of goodwill 20 to 25 years ago, again, with updated scientific techniques and with updated educational research, attributions do change. So, and that's something that's not always evident when pieces have been in collections for that period of time. And Samantha, I don't know if you want to add on any comments.
Yeah, I would just say from a planning perspective, everything Colleen just said is very important, and especially her point about understanding the source of where you're buying things from, and due diligencing. I think a lot of times people who purchase art think that it is accompanied by like a certificate of authenticity from the gallery where they bought it, that means what they have is accurate, and then when they go to sell it, then they find out that that artist doesn't have certificates of authenticity, or that gallery wasn't the appropriate venue to be issuing that certificate of authenticity. So it can be the difference between owning what you think is a very valuable piece to finding out that you own something with zero value because you don't have the correct paperwork to accompany it. And that requires going to a specialist who knows that artist, not just that area of art, but specifically that artist, to understand what the procedure is for establishing authenticity. And there are some artist committees that have catalog raisonnés, for example, where you can easily have someone like from Colleen's team take a look at the catalog raisonné or look at the invoices, the bills of sale. Establishing attribution can sometimes be a little bit of putting together breadcrumbs to make a piece of bread. But if you're dealing with an artist, especially that has moral rights or droit moral in Europe, then there actually might be a process by which you need to send the work to go be seen in person. And that comes with all other sorts of issues and questions. So I think you have to be a little bit buyer beware when you're purchasing, and you've got to seek the right advice and counsel to make sure that you're getting what you think you're buying.
So important. Rely upon the experts, especially if you're going to make an acquisition of any substance. I would assume you would make sure the proper credentials are coming along with that piece of art.
Well,
but then it's a question of what is the proper credentials.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
sometimes the person selling it to you might be saying, "Oh, don't worry, it's I'm attaching a certificate where I say it's correct." But that might not be the right person to say it. So you might have to go seek a second opinion just to make sure that you're really purchasing the right way.
Right. And just to add on to Samantha's comment, as we discussed earlier, Mark, it is an emotional acquisition. It can be somewhat impulsive, and especially when you're at, an art fair, whether it's domestic or international, or at auction, or wherever the case might be, even just visiting galleries. It tends to be more of an impulsive acquisition, hence emotionally driven. So you're not always thinking of the due diligence practices that should be exercised prior to this type of acquisition.
That makes sense. So we're wrapping up here, and we want to end with a more lighthearted question, and this is directed towards both of you. If you could meet any artist, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Samantha, I'll let you go first.
This is tricky because this is opening up the entire canon of art history. There's a lot of people that I would have liked this to be maybe a dinner party or a larger, but having to narrow it down right now, I've been having a moment with the artist Camille Claudel. She was a sculptor that somewhat famously was also involved with Rodin, the sculptor who did the Burghers of Calais and the Thinker. And I just saw a great exhibition in Chicago of her work, and there aren't that many examples of her work that survive. partially because there's a lot of kind of drama and intrigue about her relationship with Rodin and the way that he kind of stymied her career in the classic trope of male artist and female artist relationship. But there's a big question among scholars whether a lot of the works that Rodin did, specifically like the hands, which are the kind of the biggest part of a Rodin sculpture, were actually done by her. So I think if I could resurrect her and meet her, I would probably ask how many of them she actually did.
And Samantha, like yourself, I had a real difficult time trying to pick one artist. But there is one artist that I absolutely really, really like, and that's Joan Mitchell. And Joan Mitchell, she was an abstract expressionist whose career was very, very prolific. She started her career in New York. She had the chance to exhibit in the famous 9th Street show in 1951. And then she concluded, her career in France. And I lived in Paris for 7 years. So I would love to have the opportunity to learn more about and hear stories of Joan's adventures being a female abstract expressionist in France. The other thing that really attracts me to Joan is not only her artistic ability, but the fact that she gave so much personal support to so many young artists and writers, not only just during her lifetime, but actually her generosity continued after her death with the formation of the Joan Mitchell Foundation. And it was really created to support and recognize individual artists. So I admire the fact that Joan was a successful artist, but also supported artists and had a life-changing impact on those who spent time with her.
Beautiful. Colleen and Samantha, thank you so much for joining us today. This was very, very informative. And we thank you for your time. And I just want to thank Molly Giordano again for allowing us to record here.
Thanks, you, Mark.
Bye. Goodbye.
The material and opinions voiced are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what is appropriate for you, please contact a member of our team.